So, we are back from the theater. I would like to say that I like and I feel like it has been a case with horror movies where the concept of world building has kind of been lost to so much so it's a point of contention with me in modern horror because I feel as though world building is a lost art and it very much shouldn't be. Let me give you let me paint the portrait for you. LV-426 in Ridley Scott's Alien, Freddy's Dream World, The Other World of Silent Hill. I very much enjoy it when a horror movie can tell me a story and take me somewhere. And for the longest time, if I'm being 100% honest, it has just been just bland stories with bland characters in bland settings for far too long. Now, the movie that we just came from is, as you can tell from this video's title, this from the video itself, from the thumbnail. The movie that we just came from is Imaginary. Now, strictly speaking, Imaginary is not a good movie, but it's not a bad movie. Like one thing that kept coming to mind as we were watching it was all right, this is not actively offensive. Like it's not like doing its utmost to piss me off. That much I can and will give it credit for. Um so those those were the two impressions that first came to mind. It at least makes a pitch for world building. And to me, believe me, there have been a lot of bad movies. There have been a lot of there's been every Blumhouse movie that is just there that ain't nothing to shake a stick at. This, while not a good movie, to me is a cut above the rest. And in my preview, I was just like, this is just going to be another run of the mill. Again, this is not a good movie, but it doesn't suck. It didn't anger me watching it, and I wasn't bored watching it. Trauma Dom, what we discussed it after leaving the theater and a little bit right before the video, but what would be your impressions?
I mean, overall, I would definitely agree with you on those aspects where it's just not good. It is watchable. I
Yeah.
mean, the secrets to me were the subtleties.
Mhm.
Certain aspects of, an entire movie kind of playing out one specific detail, and it was really just all in the main character's head,
Yeah. Uh,
or your foreshadowing.
mhm. Um, for me, one thing I can say is the leading lady is very pretty. She wasn't like a crappy actress. I'm always. It's the most unfortunate thing that liberal storytelling and plot development has developed the woke cinema to the point that we as fans kind of moan, groan, roll our eyes whenever we see a diversity character in a movie that it's going to rely on tokenism. Like, oh hey, it's enough
Yes.
that we have a black female in this. We don't have to give her a character and we don't have to tell her a story. God forbid we make her an interesting person to pursue or follow in this narrative. But I can honestly say that she from a an acting perspective, she's the best part of it. She's never condescending or expecting she's not needing people to like big her up at every given moment or tell her how stunning and brave she is. All the hallmarks of woke cinema. She is very pretty and she does have some life to her in her performance. Um Huh. There were I noticed that there were two scenes involving parents where these particular parents are rushed in abruptly and like they're abruptly dropped as soon as they are introduced, and they kind of it feels like the movie only introduced them for the sake of a jump scare, and that was kind of disappointing. Um, oh my god. Do you even remember anything about the husband other than the fact that he was just an effeminate male?
Zero, but I think the hipster thing is more the norm now.
Yeah, yeah, very, very hipster. Just there's nothing about him. He, I don't know. He just seems like very dainty, and there's not an ounce of masculinity to him. To the point that when like he responds to a B&E in his own home with three women that he's living with, his wife and two daughters. He responds to a B&E with a road trip. I'm like, what? What? Like, bro, um, you're going on a business trip when something kind of major just happened. Like that seemed out of place and took me out of the theater, out of the scene and the movie for a beat. Um, so Trauma Dom asked me. He actually spoiled what was going to be my response beforehand, but I'll clue you guys in. He asked me what my favorite scene of the or what scene to me was unexpected during the watch of this movie. And I got to be honest, there is a scene and hmm, they kind of spoil it in the trailer. There's a scene with a therapist, which I initially rolled my eyes to watching the trailer because it's like, oh God, really? You're you're taking so many cues from Annabelle when this really should be Annabelle. I always do that. You're
Hmm.
taking so many cues from that crappy doll movie Megan from last year. Like, just do your own thing. There's a scene with a therapist where a little girl is trying to speak about her experience with her new imaginary friend who seems to inhabit this teddy bear now. That I was not expecting and was very well handled. Um, Basically, it's the little girl doing the talking for her imaginary friend, but in a very unsettling way, so much so that even the therapist is freaked out, especially when she's facing the girl and the therapist can still hear the imaginary friend. Hey, kudos for that. Let it never be said that I don't give credit where it's due. And that was a standout moment. And while that would be a mild spoiler because that scene was in the trailers, what me and Tramadon were also discussing is the scene immediately following that, which was a good 1-2 combination. And not only was the follow up to the scene with the therapist handled really well, neither scene was a jump scare. It wasn't like the sounds of bones cracking. It wasn't blood running from the walls. It was like they were able to do it with subtly, with subtlety, with creativity, and with tension. That top marks for. Um, there were a lot of this movie didn't so much remind me of, but it. How can I put it? It didn't remind me of the movie I'm about to mention, but there were aspects that I thought were done better in 2023's The Boogeyman. I thought that that was a much better executed of a movie than this one was. Um, I'm sorry to, and I kind of figured once we met the older sister, I knew that they weren't gonna do anything with her. I knew she was just gonna be caricature bitchy sister who doesn't want a stepmom. And to be honest, she never really progressed beyond the adversarial stepdaughter. Which brings me to my next point. One unforgivable failing of this movie is when you have a small cast like this, you absolutely need to deliver and nail the characters. It's one thing if you have a big bloated cast and hey, you can't dedicate enough time and character development for everybody, but
One gets
dude,
lost in the other.
yeah, like this movie had four characters, if that, and 2 hours to give me reasons to care about them, and it really didn't. Like, I'm there. for the story. Like I'm engaged in what the story is. I don't know who these characters are, and we're kind of at the point where, okay, you show me a little kid, all right, make me care about them. This was the problem in last year's Megan movie. I didn't care about the little girl. In fact, I don't think that she can act.
No.
But yeah, like again, you have almost 2 hours and you have 4 characters. The like we just finished saying, the husband is basically a non-entity. Um Speaking of characters, there is a predictable heel turn towards the end, which that could have been played a little better, but I saw that alleged swerve coming. The plot this plot did have flashes of brilliance. Um, the ending was the resolution in the ending was a bit abrupt. It was just like, okay, we got to wrap this thing up, and it's just like, if you're dealing with and again, this isn't a spoiler, if you're dealing with a land of imagination, which the trailers give away, there's like another world where this imaginary friend inhabits. Um, if you're going to occupy that world, give me like an equally creative ending where they're able to, I don't know, turn the tables on the imaginary friend and use imagination in a positive sense or whatever, which I felt like it was a missed opportunity. Um, uh, Speaking of, there are times where, how can I put this? You want to be very careful with creature effects because they always say, oh, the lead up to horror movies is good, but then you see the monster at the end and it's a bit of a disappointment. If you're gonna have a big scary gorilla bear, and that's another thing that the trailers kind of spoiled. If you're gonna have that, give me like let me paint the picture in my head. Give me like a either keep the thing in the shadows, imply its size, imply its strength with, I don't know, each time it moves, like the ground quakes. But showing too much kind of killed the effect of it by the end. And there were times where this movie kind of ripped off other movies, like the Pennywise deadlights, the staring, the monster stares at its prey and its eyes flash different lights and colors. And I'm not going to directly spoil it, but speaking of eyes, this movie kind of rips off Coraline.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, my impressions were, it's not actively offensive. It's not passively boring. There are flashes of brilliance. And I mentioned this before. Me and Trauma Dom were leaving the theater, and I mentioned in my preview, I thought that there was going to be a single moment where you're just like, "Oh wow, this is good. This could actually be something." And then immediately, just like that, the movie pulls the rug out from underneath you. No, instead, the entire movie was like that. Now, that might sound like a disappointment, and it was, but this movie, on the whole, demonstrates potential for the premise itself, potential for the studio if anyone bothers to pay attention. Like, I wanted more of it instead of I wanted more of the ingredients they already gave me, as opposed to introducing new elements that would have made it a different movie entirely. So this film, and I don't want to sound repetitive saying potential, but there were points in time where it's like, oh, okay, I see what you're going. I see where you're trying to take this, and it could have been more than it was. And again, you're dealing with a land of imagination, and you're dealing with dark fantasy. So you have to bring that your A game to that. You have to think of creative ways where, the monster um has a weakness. All monsters do. Freddy had a weakness and Frankenstein had a weakness. So part of the world building, I think, when you do something like this is finding out how to give and take. If you're going to give a monster that has all these powers and whatever, maybe the heroes or the survivors stumble upon some kind of weakness that the monster has. So that would have been better to have seen. Now, I mentioned Megan a couple of times, also in my preview. Um, this movie had the potential with the introduction of the teddy bear. This movie had the potential to introduce or become Blumhouse's version of Annabelle. Now, as much as people have always liked to gloat and brag about how Annabelle is like such an icon and oh my god, she's right up there with Chucky. Dude, spoiler alert, Annabelle doesn't do crap. She sits there. She looks creepy, and she'll move. She'll tilt her head really slowly in a creaking sound to ratchet up the tension. Annabelle doesn't do anything. Okay, name me any other monster, and I can tell you what they do. I can tell you what Godzilla does. I can tell you what Candyman does. I can tell you what Ghostface does. Annabelle, the doll, doesn't do anything. So what do I mean when I say that? This the what the hell's the Chauncey?
Yeah, Chauncey the bear.
Chauncey the teddy bear had the opportunity to be Blumhouse's version of Annabelle in the sense that it's a child's plaything that actually does something. Um for their sake, I would hope that Blumhouse would, roll the dice on this, improve what needs to be patched up, add a little something to the lore, which I'll get to in a second, which was another boon. Um, and like expand on this because, like I said, there's something there. There's something like the the fact that it feeds off of children's imagination or whatever. Um, I liked that while the protagonist had a backstory, they didn't more or less they didn't try to explain what Chauncey is. I would have felt like that would have been like bursting the bubble, taking all the air out of the sails. And they did have a character that serves as like as an exposition dump, which was lazy, and I wished it would have like subtly tell these details or reveal these details about the monster, but they didn't do an origin story. I thought that would I was afraid they were gonna do that. They didn't, and I'm glad they didn't because that would have killed it. So that's my impression of this. I wish Blumhouse steered in this direction as a whole, but sadly, I think this movie and its potential will be lost in the assembly line of movies that the studio churns out on a damn near bi-monthly basis. Trauma Dom, any closing thoughts?
None. I don't want to give them too much credit because
You sound like me.
no, I mean honestly, because if I give them credit, it's gonna give them almost the right to act with impunity
Hmm.
for the next line of garbage we have to take.
I f-
If they continued in this direction,
Mhm.
I feel like there's some potential
Yeah,
for them to honestly be worth their name. But
right.
for the time being, I mean, I'm just enjoying the fact that I wasn't completely and utterly miserable
Yeah.
throughout the entire time.
Yeah. I wasn't like counting down the minutes until this movie was over. I wasn't rolling my eyes at every plot detail or reveal.
Yeah, no.
Um again, this might sound strange just because I do have problems with it, but I do have praise for it.
Yeah.
It's not I'm not trying to be exaggerating when I say I have never seen a good Blumhouse movie ever. And the studio's been around for 16 years of yeah, 16 years this year. Um and to say that this film is a disappointment is a step up because a disappointment means that you have some level of expectation for it. Now, obviously, I did. If you watch my preview to this, my precaution to imaginary, I had no expectations for this going in. Watching it though, I said to myself, okay, I could see where in someone who took more time with characterization, someone who boosted up the more fantastical elements of it, especially in the dream world that they were in. Someone who took time to build a lore this could really be something. And believe me, be, like it's really easy to say, if you build it, they will come. It's really easy to say, if this were a good movie, more people would like it. But dude, that's obvious. But what I'm saying is, if you could tap into some, a great story in dark fantasy, I believe that we have gotten so much of a glut of remakes and slashers and zombies and run of the mill films and been there, done that movies. I'm convinced that there is an audience, whether they realize it or not, that yearns for dark fantasy. Because how much dark fantasy do we honestly get? So, um, i- is this? I would watch this movie again. Is it great? No. Does it suck? No. And I realize that that impression in and of itself is middle of the road. And anyone who listens to me knows that I don't deal in hyperbole. So, this movie genuinely is a step up for uh the genre as we've been getting it the last decade or so, and for the studio. The sad part is I don't think anyone's gonna realize that. But anyway, as far as closing thoughts, would I recommend this? Yeah, I honestly would. I would hope that you guys see what I saw in it, the potential that it had. Um, I genuinely hope that one day, they can look at this. The handlers of this can look at this as something special. If not this in and of itself, that this can lead perhaps to a movie down a different movie, a different story altogether, but at least tap into that dark fantasy. And hey, they had it going. They like one thing that I've always enjoyed is when you saw that other world towards the end,
Yeah.
you know what MC Escher is,
The
right? That
never ever.
Yeah, the never ever.
Never.
You know what MC Escher is, right? The painting of like three-dimensional stairs that go in all different directions.
What's that called?
MC Escher was the name of the artist.
Obsession. No. Yeah.
So that has been utilized in horror, especially in the 80s before. The Labyrinth of Hellraiser in Hellraiser 2. And MC Escher was used for one of the in the closing dream sequence of A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. So, I think that there's I genuinely think that there's potential with this movie. I hope that Blumhouse realizes it. I doubt it, but I mean, in the right hands, and in someone who's creative, especially when it comes to dark fantasy, hey, that aspect is very much missing. Um, but I would give this a positive review. It's not great. Don't go into it with like ridiculous expectations, but this is a step in the right direction for the House of Blum. Um, and if it isn't already very painstakingly obvious, another thing that I would like to close on, after 6 very long months, I can honestly say me and Trauma Dom, we're back. Yep. Stay tuned. If you're resigned to your fate, time to subscribe to your fears.
Warn your friends. Warn everyone.